we are back for another Ted Lasso talk, a TED Talk, if you will. Welcome to John's Comics with Kids. I'm John. We are chatting through the bigger themes, the bigger ideas in this fantastic show, Ted Lasso. This is our third show covering this topic. I've done other shows in the past, The Wire and Lost, but really each time I'm trying to find a show that I feel like has a lot of discussion areas to dive into, and then a lot of community members who want to get involved. So when I say we, I mean you. Those of you in the community that have loved this show have been joining me, and I got two awesome guests here tonight. So I want to shout out first the other great John in our community. We got John Big Daddy Ross. What's up?
How you doing, John? Nice to see you.
Good to have you, sir, and have you here on the show, because you were one of the first people to reach out to me. We're like, oh, if you're talking Ted Lasso, I want to get involved on this.
Yeah. My wife, I mean, really, you're the reason why I watched the show. And my wife and I both really enjoyed it. I think we've watched it through twice now. And then I've turned a whole bunch of people onto it. So
it's one of those things that I feel like it word of mouth really drew people to the show.
It really did. I think because of Apple TV. You know, I mean, I bought a new iPad and got 3 months worth of free Apple TV. So there you go.
They'll hook you on something. You get a new computer, You get a new phone, and then you find that now you're going to explore this world.
That's it.
And we got one other awesome dad here on the show tonight. We got my friend, the one and only a bearded comic. What? Oh, Ted Lasso. What's up? Is that a Christmas ornament?
No, it is the McFarlane Movie Maniacs.
It's like an action figure.
Yeah, so it's one of like the McFarlane Toys action figures.
Did they just do Ted, or did they do a whole slew?
They've done. They did like. It's only Ted from Ted Lasso. They've done like Wicked Witch from Wizard of Oz. So they're taking top characters from different things and doing it. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
Welcome in, Greg. Good to see you again, man. It's been a while.
It has. I feel like I haven't talked to you for ages. I feel like I talked to John more recently than you. So
yeah, terrific on. You know?
That's right.
Lucky Ducks. How was that?
It was a good show.
It always is. It's always a fun show.
Yeah.
Jealous. Very jealous. Let's jump into the chat. We'll say hello to some friends and then dive into our topic for tonight. Tailgating. Brother John. Wrong John. Yeah, we've only got room for one John a show at this point. Not sure why you blew this opportunity to have the League of Extraordinary Johns on one show. Yeah, I mean, a mascot. That sounds fair.
I mean, I was a mascot in college, so I'll take it.
We got Rob Boswell in the chat. What's going on, Rob? Good to see you. Watch out for Rob. He's always causing trouble there. We got Caroline. What is up, lady? Fantastic. I feel like she and I have been in a ton of chats together, just hanging out when Bleecker Street's doing his thing or whatever. Good to see you, Caroline. I hope your Friday went well. We got Aggressively Relaxing saying he misses the show. My show, Ted Lasso, either way.
Ted Lasso.
The rewind works for everybody, but maybe you cut the cord on Apple TV, and I get it. I understand.
Yeah.
We got Perry in the chat. Perry's trying to get a late night stream going later after this. If he's successful, I will have somebody drop the link to it so people know where it's going after this. But I do know he's trying to get a late night party going.
Oh, great.
Lady F says, you're a great dad and kids are nice and all, but I'm currently pretty pleased at my decision not to procreate. Hashtag not the topic for tonight. We're going the other way with this, but I appreciate
we're not talking about procreation.
We're not talking about not having kids.
Damn.
I thought we were talking about how you have kids, like the birds and the bees.
Definitely not doing that either. What's up, JP?
Guys.
JP.
Jason's going to be on episode 4 of the series. We'll be over talking about that in a couple of weeks. So be prepared for JP joining this show at some point here. And we got Chris says, I thought Greg quit live shows.
No, I just realized once the pandemic was over, I had to have somewhat of a life.
Real jobs come up. That's a real thing. Thank you for coming by. I appreciate you, lady. Fantastic. And hopefully these shows are entertaining for people who haven't seen Ted Lasso, because the topics are really broad and really true to life, I think, in a lot of ways. Speaking of which, tonight we're discussing parenting or parents and kids, because really at the core of this show, and I think we'll kick it off by discussing Ted here in just a moment, is a character dealing with how to be a father despite challenges in his life, both current and past. But I wanted to kick it off with a question I've kind of asked each group each night, which is this theme. What do you think the makers of the show are trying to say about parenting? What are some of the thoughts you have that come across to you? Because obviously writers, when they come upon a theme they want to really discuss on their shows or in their books or in their stories, they really have a concept they want to say here about it. So John, I'm gonna start with you. Like, what were your takeaways as far as what the writers of Ted Lasso wanted to say about parenting?
I guess as I think back on it, I mean, going through the 3 seasons and all the different relationships, whether you're talking about, because, you've got Ted and Henry, you've got the Higgins family, you've got, Roy and Phoebe, which is not really a parent relationship, but Jamie's family, all of them. I took from it that there's a lot of different relationships. Not everybody's the same, and they're difficult, they're challenging, and they're rewarding.
That's a great way to say it. Yeah. Greg, anything you would like to add to that as far as your takeaways from parenting?
I think they did a really good job of a broad scope of parenting. That parenting's messy. I think a lot of times when you get into these shows, sitcoms or whatever, they're very much typecast into this is a role of what a good dad is, or this is a role of what a good mom is, and these types of things. And I think because there's so many characters, it allowed them to open up the playing field to say, like, these are what different relationships look like. Some are good, some are bad, some are difficult, some are messy, some are like, it wasn't just like, this is the correct way to parent. And I think that was the beautiful thing, is that you could probably relate to either your parenting style or, like, even if you aren't a parent, of how you were raised as a kid, and things like, and you might have had a great relationship with your parents, you might not have had a great relationship. Everything is showcased there, which you don't get very often when you're having a topic, especially like parenting. Because I feel like most of the times the writers hone in on one thing of, like, this is what it is. You're a deadbeat dad, or you're aloof dad, or you're a good dad, or, and I'm using dad just because
because there's a lot of dads and sons in the show too,
And so I think there just is a well representation of, there's not a correct way to parent, and it's difficult, and there's a lot of things that are showcased, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So
I think that's great. I think that everybody could identify with someone between. I mean, if you look at the first season, they're not as heavily influenced by the parenting. It seems to develop more in the second and third seasons as the characters develop and things. And I just think that everybody could identify. I mean, there were scenes with different actors that I thought of my parents, I thought of my grandparents, I thought of my brothers and sisters and their relationships, so friends.
Totally. And I love that you guys hit on something that came across to me as well, which is, there's no right or wrong way to do this. And that there's a lot of things that go into this that make it messy, that make it challenging, and that working through the challenges, right, is the gravy here. Working through the difficulties, whatever they are, because parenting happens in the messy places. It doesn't happen when the kids win the game, right? Nobody really needs a dad when the game is won. They need the dad to be there when they lost and they got hurt or there's a problem, because those are the moments when the support is needed, right? I wanted to highlight Nigel's in the chat. What's up, Nigel? Good to see you.
Hey, Nigel.
Comics. And I saw
down in Baltimore.
Yes,
I know. I'm so sad I'm not there this year. It's this weekend.
I got issues. Chris is in the chat. He's jumping out though. He's got something going on tonight. Thank you for coming by, Chris. Catch the replay. Appreciate you, sir. So let's talk Ted for a little bit, because obviously, for me at least, Ted is the core parenting story arc, right? We've got his relationship with his mom, who plays into the final season, his relationship with his dad, which is kind of littered all the way through, and then his relationship with his son, right? So as a kid and as a parent, Ted seems to be the core of what this show is about. And we get all these other planets circulating around him, but he seems to be the core, right? What do you feel like, Greg? I'll kick it to you. Like, as far as Ted's journey as both a parent and a son, like, what are some of the things that you were taken away with?
Well, I feel like the show evolved a lot from the first season of like where it was trying to figure out what to do, because we get a little bit of insight into Ted's background and parenting, but not as much as we do, I think, in later seasons, as much of what he struggled with, because I know right off the bat, you get this happy-go-lucky, like, hey, woohoo, and you're like, oh, everything's great. And then you start to peel back, the layers of the onion and going, okay, he's compensating for some of these things. And, and then we get it wasn't until the third season that we see how much it was layered up of him trying to cover up his own feelings, because that's what he was mirroring and mimicking what he saw in his mother, of how she was trying to, losing his father in an early age, and how to process that as a family,
And I love that moment when we first get that info in season 1, when he's throwing the darts, and he mentions until I lost my dad, and you see the look on Rebecca's face, because she recognizes that at a young age she lost her relationship with her dad in a lot of ways. And I feel like it's the moment when she starts to come around to caring about Ted, right, and start appreciating what he can do, and maybe less of a destructive force and more of a creative force comes out of her. Because I think it's that little moment that we start to see who Ted is really underneath.
Right. And I think because until you see who Ted is, he's going to come off as, you're annoying, you're over happy, you're over, happy-go-lucky kind of mindset. And if you've gone through the ringer, that's the last thing I think you want to be, of like, oh yeah, let's surround myself. And then when you understand and start to see that it's a safety net that he has put up in place because of what trauma and stuff he's experienced, that's when, that's human nature. When we see someone where you go, I understand what you're going through, I can relate to that, we start to have empathy, and we start to, feel for him and go, okay, I can see you now as a person, because I've gone through what you've gone through, or I've seen that happen. And so we start to see those roots of that and that experience, and how then it shapes how Ted tries to do his own parenting. And I think that is a huge influence in this of, how you were parented, either shapes what you're doing, or because of, I don't, for the good or bad, right? I'm going to do what the example my parents set for me, or I'm going to do the opposite because I know what it did to me and stuff, and how you balance that. And I think it's a really good, they pull off the layers throughout the, all 3 seasons really well with that.
John, anything you want to add as far as Ted and his relationship with his son and his parents, and kind of his parenting journey, if you will?
One of the things that struck me, and John, you and I have talked a little bit in the past, but I was a submariner, and I kept thinking about being away from my family. And, like, I didn't have to deal with that, but it did make me think of, like, what if? Right. And I also pulled in like some Cats in the Cradle, Harry Chapin kind of moments there, where, he's buying gifts for Henry, and Henry's running off, or Henry's like getting distracted, his friends showing up, and Ted's trying to do the fatherly thing and be in touch with them every day. Right. And Henry's like, hey, my friend just showed up, I'm going to take off. And they're dealing with the time change and all of that kind of stuff. And it struck me as like how difficult that situation could be, and made me appreciate, I guess, not having to deal with that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Because it's what he would have been in Kansas, so that's Central Time.
Yeah,
Central, so it's a 6-hour time change for them.
Yeah,
Ooh,
scary. Parenting's hard enough in person, right?
Yeah,
right. And I mean, we have all these great things like FaceTime and stuff like that now, but it's still not the same.
No. No, and you're not there at the moment. There's a moment when he gets a phone call from Henry's school that he wasn't going to get picked up, and for me, that was one of those moments that made the distance real, Here's Ted getting that emergency phone call and feeling like I'm so helpless. Like I can't be there when he needs me, and I can't be there to help out. And all I can do is answer this phone and be a voice on the other end.
You see, when you said that, I didn't think of that particular scene. I thought of the one with the bullying.
When he's retelling it to Beard and everybody in the coach room.
Well, he finds out that Henry wasn't being bullied, but Henry was being the bully.
Yeah. Right.
And it's like, those are the things where, I guess as a father, that's kind of put on us most of the time, the mother's having to deal with it there. And, I think that's where I would have, if I was in that situation, I would have a hard time with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And obviously all of us on the panel, for those that don't know, have 2 kids and at varying ages. I know Greg's playing catch up with us, trying to catch up to where we're
watching
at.
YouTube. I'm watching YouTube of like how it is and
learning what not to do.
Not do that.
But I knew that this was a great topic for the 2 of you guys. Not that other people in our community don't have kids, but that I think we've all chimed and talked about our kids with one another, and I think it seemed like a great discussion base for the 3 of us. So Ted, obviously, at the end of the show, makes a big, bold choice as a dad, and not as ultimately what feels like at the beginning of the show. He's making a choice as a husband to try to do something for his wife that he hopes will maybe solve something. Later, I think maybe he realizes he did it for himself, that he needed the space for himself. But at the time, I think he justified it as doing it for her. And at the end, he does something for his son. What were your thoughts, John, about how Ted finishes the show? Because he's still a soccer coach at the end.
Yeah, I mean, man, the end of the show is emotional for me and partly because of the soundtrack, because they play Father and Son by Cat Stevens through that whole end.
Yeah.
And I lost my father 6-7 years ago now. And, I was not overly close with my father. Like, I grew up with him. But 19, I went in the Navy and I never went back. So it was, I was always traveling to see him. So I wasn't around him all the time. We would talk on the phone regularly and things like that. So that kind of hit me, but it struck me as, you've got Rebecca at the end there offering, saying, hey, I can give you as much money. You could be one of the highest paid coaches and all of this stuff.
Henry could live here. He could go to school here.
He could go to a private school and all this stuff. And, and have an opportunity of growing up in a foreign country and experiencing that, which I think would be wonderful. I mean, that's one of the things that I look at as my Navy years is a great thing in my youth. So, but I also just sit there and think it's great that he's there for his kid, especially at that age, because it's fleeting. You're learning. My kids have grown now. I can go weeks without seeing my kids. And, it's one of those things that you just go, oh, holy crap, I haven't seen my kid in a month, or something like that. Let's get together and go have dinner or something. So,
I mean, we're counting the summers we have Kate before she goes off to college. We're like, there's 2. We have 2 summers left before she's off to college. And we're trying to figure this thing out. Like, how do we maximize that time with her? Because it's so finite now. It seems so much more finite now, maybe in these last 2 years. But then you look at Ted basically saying that money, that life, that thing is going to probably be more tumultuous for my kid, to pull him away from his friends, to pull him away from what he knows, to probably get in a giant custody battle with my wife, all for a job. Like, he makes the choice that I think is best for, at least for his son, maybe not necessarily for him, but for his son, he makes that choice.
And realistically, in a few years, his son's going to be going to college. I mean, and he's still got that opportunity.
Right.
You know?
Absolutely. And his son will recognize it and certainly be aware of it when it comes to reflecting on it later, you know?
Yeah.
Greg, any thoughts on how Ted finishes the show?
Well, I think it was the only fitting way to go, right? Because I think if you had it where Henry came there, it would have still been about Ted uprooting his son and his son's life. And it was showing the impact of, I need to make this decision for my kid and how important that is as a parent. And, you know, I think, you know, as a parent myself, I see that and I relate to that. And I'm like, I would go and do anything that I could for my kids. And, you know, and that's been a lot on my mind a lot lately. You know, I lost my dad a year ago. A couple of days ago, it would have been a year ago. And, you know, our relationship and the things that now I look back and see, like, you know, my dad giving up, like, we had planned to go to the 2002 Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City for years. And it ended up happening when I was on a wrestling tournament in high school. And I was like, it's an end of year tournament. I got to stay. And my dad was like, cool, if you're staying, I'm staying because I'm watching you wrestle. Like, and I was like, that meant a lot as a kid. But now as a parent, I look back, I'm like, holy buckets. Like, he gave up watching Olympic athletes compete to watch me lose.
Once in a lifetime experience for a lot of people.
It wasn't even like, oh, like there's like a heroic story of like, I did great. And I went on to the next, I lost. But like the things that, you know, a good parent does for their kid when they realize like this is the right move for this situation. Right. You know, and you guys both talk about, you know, your time frames of the 2 summers and, you know, my job and stuff. I see like there's this illustration of you have like 932 marbles in a jar, and that represents every single week from like birth till they're 18. Oof. And like how then like you take away a marble each week and how that jar just dwindles. And it's such a drastic illustration. Yeah. Of like, you're like, these fights, these times where you fight and bicker with your kid because they don't want to go to sleep because they're super tired because you just had soccer and they stayed up an hour and a half later than they want. And I'm not talking from experience tonight at all. And you just want to like strangle the kid and like, what are you doing? Like, just and you have to, sometimes you have to realize and go back and like, oh my goodness. Like, yeah. So it's fascinating to see, like, I was really happy with where they, you know, they ended that story of Ted saying, I need to make this move for my kid. I'm not forcing my kid to uproot. I'm not forcing to put a strain on his relationship with his mother because we know she's not going to uproot, you know, so like to say like that's the only way it could end with this theme being so prominent throughout the movie or
absolutely
movie.
Well, I mean, yeah. And I think as much as I tell people the show's about mental health, it's also, I think the parenting side covers so much of what is going on here. And maybe it's just because how we are raised affects so much of our life and so much of the ways in which we live. I think I'm going to try to start with dads because the first season especially and most of the second it's dad heavy. We get a lot of the impact of fathers a lot through this, and it may just be because sports tends to be an area where men support their kids most clearly. Let's spend a little time on dads, and specifically I want to dive into Jamie, who's clearly still a son and living the life of a son and dealing with the impact of a dad who's clearly been cheering him on or at least pushing him in a lot of ways in his athletic life. And then you have Roy, who doesn't really have a dad and talks a lot about not having a dad. And then you've got Ted, who had a dad, lost a dad. In general, we have a lot of men in the field of athletics who have quite tumultuous father-son relationships and it has charted their lives in very different ways. Greg, oh no, he's taking a drink. John, what are your thoughts on the dads and the sports relationships that we get here, because they're all so completely different?
So, Jamie's dad really struck hard for me. And I think part of it is just other discussions that I'm having with friends, because he's one of those fathers that I think, he's an abusive drunk, but he's also one of those people that is living life through his son, and in doing that, he's got high expectations. He's putting a lot on Jamie. And, I've known people like that, I don't want to get into it, but
But I
family
think we
members
all have, like we see them when we're taking our kids to games or whatever, or we've been that dad when you're in that moment of feeling like I am so invested in this athletic endeavor or whatever.
But I just keep thinking of The Breakfast Club with Emilio Estevez, and you got to win, and our culture is, if you're not a winner, you're the first loser, and all of those other
Ricky
things.
Bobby.
And and it just really, it struck me as being so negative and so just, Ted approaches it completely differently. It's like he loses, he's like, they're having a party. The people are the news people are all like, do you think that's a good idea? And he's like, hey,
yeah, it's Sam's birthday, we're still gonna do this, right?
We're still gonna do this,
Yeah.
So he's the one that really struck me. I think I don't recall a whole lot about Roy and his father.
He talks a lot about his parents. I think both of his parents were gone early, and that his grandparents were raising him, and that then his grandfather died. When he was up at some college or some school event. He was at a boarding school. I think he was at a sleepaway school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is very common over in Europe. So
absolutely.
Right.
But then you also have the flip side of the Jamie and his dad is obviously Sam Obasanya and his dad. You have an incredibly supportive, caring, not inactive dad, right? Not a passive dad, a dad who's going to talk to his son regularly, question him on his decisions for advertising material that he gets involved with, lay a ground of ethics in his son, belief system in his son, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a benefit of being involved in your child's life. Like I think sometimes we harp on the dads who are trying to live vicariously through their kids. Well, if you're not doing that, you're also not sitting back on your laurels, right? Like you're also still trying to set up those, and I think there's a good balance between that and of the relationship between Sam and his dad, and then Jamie and his dad. I coached high school wrestling for 8 years, and I dealt with a lot of parents in those times that were living vicariously through their kid.
Sure.
In athletics. And as a high school coach, I'm like, y'all, first off, wrestling, they're not going to go very far with anything in wrestling. That's very small, of any sport. But it's like how much parents are like, oh, well, I did this and this, and so my kid should do this. And it's like, oh, they're not you. And so that you get that balance. And then, like you said, with Sam's dad, there's that scene where Sam wants to show his dad his restaurant. He's so excited. He's so proud of it. And it gets trashed. And he's like, I can't do this. And he's going through it, right?
Yeah.
He's throwing stuff at the locker because he's like, he's dealing with how meaningless soccer really is and how fickle the sports are, the love that they get. He's like, they love me in the moment, but if I miss a goal or something, they're going to hate me. Just how, why does it even matter in that moment?
Right.
Then his dad just shows up in the locker room and you're like, stop it. That's one of those, all right, I'm going to get emotional moments because Dad does that because he's like, hey.
Well, and immediately Sam runs to his dad and gets a hug. It's such a great antithesis to the Jamie and his dad and the punch in the locker room.
And what I love though too about it, if you remember how that scene ends, Ted comes in and is like, hey, let's, practice is going to start, but hey, if you take a day off. And I was like, no, go. You're gonna go practice. And it wasn't you're doing it because of this, that you need to. It was more of you're doing this because you need to do this for yourself, not because
it's your responsibility. And the problem will still be. I'll still be here later. The problem will still be here later. We can deal with it.
And that's a beautiful aspect. It wasn't you're gonna do it because you need to do this. And
no, it was not a pressure.
It was more of, hey, you're gonna do this because of you are a man
team member
responsibility to his teammates, and yeah, life sucks and is tough sometimes, and we're going to go through it. But if you sit back on this moment now, then you're always going to sit back when life gets tough and hard. And like, that was like a cool moment to see that the difference of you can push your kid to do something, but it's not necessarily to do it because you're trying to live and, through them vicariously of like, hey, so
totally.
Ola gives some advice in that episode that I really, really liked. He says, if you really want to piss them off, forgive them.
Oh my gosh.
Right. And then he says, don't fight back, fight forward.
So good.
And I was like, man, the writers nailed it on some of this stuff. And it was just like such good writing, such good message. I just really like the way they handled all of that.
And they spread that relationship out really nicely, because Dad was basically just a character on the phone for quite a while in Sam's story. And then Sam had the restaurant and he's setting it up and it's called Ola's. We're like, I don't know what that means, but it's fine. And then it builds to the reveal that it's named after his dad. And you just get the sense of we've seen why it would be named that by that point, right?
It has so much. You see how important his relationship is with his dad without even seeing his dad for so long, right? Like the phone call and the conversation of why would you represent this and this company who's doing this to our people, and setting the bar for you need to have morals and ethics that you believe in and not just go through, and like that's not always easy, right? Like that's not it's sometimes is easier of like, okay, well, this company is paying me to play a sport, like I'll take the paycheck. Why would I take off the whole company? And then like his dad utilizing like, you have a responsibility to shed light on something because you have been gifted this ability to be in the spotlight. And it's like, man, like
it's big integrity level stuff. Because you even see him like when Sam has to make the choice of not playing for his home country and not going back and staying with Ted and staying with AFC Richmond. That's going to be an impact, a discussion with his father, but you never hear his father criticize his son's decision. It's never anything like that. It's more, no, I taught my son to value what he needs, and I appreciate what he's getting from Ted. Obviously, Ted and Ola have a ton in common as far as their integrity and their sensibilities. And I think it's
mutual
great
respect.
to see that. Yeah. And I think Ola has the same respect for his son. And if anything, just tries to be that other sounding board for him when it comes to these life choices, right? I'm ignoring the chat, and I want to say hi to a bunch of people. I feel like rude.
We're just that engaging with you, John. So
I mean, that's the facts. We have Kenneth Bird who said hi and came through here. Happy to see you, Kenneth. I did not know this math fact. So you've tied all of us, brother John. Okay, respect the hustle. We got Don Gustavo. What is going on, Don? How's it going? And we got Knights of Old in the chat. Jamie teaching Roy to ride a bike was great.
Oh,
we could definitely spend a little time on. I don't want to skip off of dads, but we have a lot of surrogate dads going on here.
Yeah.
And we mentioned Roy earlier as this fun dad figure to his niece Phoebe. There's definitely some of that surrogate parenting going on. Obviously, the coach athlete relationship has parenting levels to that as well. John, what are your thoughts on some of the surrogate dads that we get here?
Ooh, I mean,
big question.
Well, no. I mean, I guess the scene or the thing that first jumped into my mind is Roy and Phoebe, and you've got it's Christmas. And Phoebe's all upset. They're supposed to have sexy Christmas, and there's Phoebe showing up, and she's got this awful breath. Yeah. And what's he do? He goes out and he goes, "Come on, we're gonna go find a dentist, and if we don't find one in 10 houses, I'm giving you each 1,000 pounds." It's like, and they go around from house to house,
Such a good episode.
It's just such a good episode, but it also shows how attached Roy is to Phoebe, even though it's not his child.
Right.
And you run into a little bit of that with Rebecca and Nora, and some of that.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's also early in the season, or I think it's in the first season, where Keely is asking Phoebe about her Uncle Roy, and like, what do you think of?
Yeah.
And she never mentions that he's a ball player.
No.
And it kind of strikes Roy as like, oh, they're learning from each other. They're learning from each other. And I think we all do that with our children. I mean, my kids have definitely given me different perspectives on things than I had in the past.
Absolutely.
Because we're living in a different time,
Yeah.
Greg, any thoughts on Roy or other surrogate dads we kind of get here?
What I love about that Christmas episode, like you're talking about, right? Like Roy, you see the father figure of Roy, like, I'm gonna protect you, of like, where he just does that grunt at the kid.
Yeah.
But you also get the surrogate father of Higgins in that episode too, of where he understands the need for all these guys who are not home for the holidays, and how important that is to say, hey, I have a space for you.
Yeah.
Know that you're loved and you're cared for, and like that you can just be yourself, and you bring a random, maybe somewhat of a hooker person to it. He doesn't care. He's like, listen, it's you. You are welcome here. Like, it's a beautiful aspect, of, when I graduated college and I came back to Ohio to take a job, my family was all out of town. My parents were in Florida. My brother was living in London. My sister was in California. So I was all alone. Like, so for the holidays, I had people that would bring me in, like, hey, if you want to come over to our house for Christmas or Thanksgiving. And like the importance of, not even that I didn't have a, loving family in my life, but it was the aspect of how important family and relationships are, especially in those holiday moments. And if you're by yourself and alone, and that's another beautiful aspect of a surrogate father. That wasn't even like Higgins isn't trying to replace their father in those moments, but he's trying to provide to say, hey, you have a space that as a parent or a family would provide for you when you can't have that experience.
You're welcome here.
Yeah. And I was just like, man, that's so cool to see, because I resonate with that, having that for a while, of like, I just couldn't always fly down for Christmas or something to see my family. So to be able to be around people at that holiday, and they're like, hey, yeah, come and join our family during this time. And it was another aspect of how to, the example that then Higgins is setting for his family, I think is also important to say, like, hey, we're going to make sure people are taken care of. And we're going to set the example to say, like, it was the whole episode where the table just gets bigger and bigger, and they're bringing the most ridiculous dishes and things, and everyone's just like, "What? Come on!"
And I think it's a wonderful. They skim over the concept that Higgins usually never gets anybody to come. That it's almost nobody,
like two people, maybe.
That clearly the Lasso way has infected a team that now feels very close, and players that might have just skipped Christmas and stayed home are now interested in being together. And what Higgins has always offered is now accepted or valuable to the rest of them. And I think that's a wonderful comment on surrogate parenting success happening elsewhere that impacts all. We mentioned Higgins. John, any thoughts on Higgins? Obviously, a lot of boys. All of us don't necessarily have.
This is why we need Brother John
testosterone energy here in our houses. But like, I feel like Higgins is, in my opinion, the best example of parenting success that the show offers us. He routinely is about supporting his boys and setting an example for his boys and creating a positive household for his boys.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about the Christmas episode, and they're handing out the gifts and stuff, and I just thought it was so ridiculous in my head that one of his sons is getting a surfboard. It's middle of Christmas in England.
Yeah.
how much surfing is this kid really going to do? You know, but that's what he wanted. So here you go, you know, and it's supporting your kid's dreams. And, you know, yeah, I just, they don't, I mean, again, if this show were to extend, they could go into some of that more. But you know, he's got his oldest son is in the clergy, right? They show that briefly in one of the scenes. But yeah, I mean, is he almost too perfect? Maybe, you know. You know, and I don't think we really get to see the expanse of it. But I do think it is interesting at the Christmas stuff. I mean, I'm like Greg, I've benefited from in the Navy of aunts and uncles that invited my friends to their place for holidays, and my wife and I opened our doors for friends. But when they do that, that's pretty cool, and it sets a good example for the kids. Even though the one, like, there's one that's probably a mid-teenager there that keeps checking out the girl. He's kind of infatuated there a little bit, but yeah, that I don't have a whole lot on Higgins though. I don't.
No, I mean, no, that was great. There's a empty space in Rebecca's life where the dad should exist that I think is kind of interesting, because obviously he is pivotal to her and her adulthood, even, you know, trying to prove something to him perhaps. And we never meet him. We never see him. What we do though is hear a ton about the experience that Rebecca had growing up with him and the frustrations with him, or and of course we see mom's perspective on him as a father and mom's view of what he brought to the table. John, did you have any thoughts on Rebecca's dad?
To be honest with you, I don't recall a whole lot about Rebecca's dad. What I think about is the scene where Rebecca is kind of unloading on her mother.
Yeah.
And the parallels between it and later Ted and his mother.
Yeah.
You know, with the frustrations with their parents. You know, Rebecca's hammering on her mother about how, you know, her mother knew that she was being cheated on and put up with it. And,
yeah,
you know, a lot of that was going on. That's the kind of stuff that resonated with me, I guess.
Yeah, because both Rebecca and Ted had a traumatic experience with their fathers and are dealing a lot with how their mothers managed that. Right. Like the impact of how, and there's a quote from Higgins where he says, "I try to love my dad for who he is and forgive him for who he isn't," which is ultimately what Rebecca and Ted are trying to do with their moms, right? Because their moms are trying to navigate something incredibly difficult, incredibly emotional, incredibly challenging when it came to their spouses and either their deaths or their shortcomings, and still be the one who stayed, the one who was there, the one who raised the kid despite this hole. So for me, like, that's that moment when Ted tells the story of his father's suicide and she tells the story of her dad's infidelity and catching him. Those mirror each other in a lot of emotional
ways. A lot of ways.
Yeah. Yep. Greg, any thoughts on absentee dad that is absent from the story, but not necessarily her life? It sounds like dad was there, but not necessarily, you know, accepted by Rebecca.
I think it goes more of, it highlights more of how the relationship between husband and wife, you know, or, you know, a couple, you know, in their marriage, you know, whatever it is, that of how you treat one another and with decency, and how that affects, you know, your children and what they see. And it's, you know, their image of who you are is to see how that relationship is, you know, here, because that's a kid's first experience with understanding what a relationship is, right? And what it's supposed to be to show, like, to love someone, you know, else and to invest in that. And so when you see the brokenness and you see the lies, the cheating and stuff like that, that's their first real example, and it resonates and it stays home and it's heavy because, you know, society tells you that's not the way, but these are people that you care about and trust deeply, and that this is what you see as an example. And so it's got to be tough and confusing and challenging for them as a person to say, well, this is what I know. Like, maybe
how do I change what I've been taught to fit what it should have been?
Right. And can I, because I don't have that experience? And it's, you know, and it's impactful to see, like, it's not, Ted and Rebecca aren't like 22-year-olds trying to figure, like, they're well off into their lives, like, that still have this trauma that they're, you know, and not to get too much into your, but like how important that is, you know, mental health and talking about things and allowing that opportunity to, you know, I don't want to hinge too much on your last episode, but of where he has that, you know, he has a confrontation with his mom, and rather than his mom getting mad for him basically telling you to F off, right? Like, she's like, she literally says that therapist must be doing some good for you. Like,
yeah.
That's where I'm just like, yes, I love that. I love that dynamic that it's like, you know, very easily could have said, like, you know, she could have retaliated in that moment and been like, screw you, Ted. Like, I'm dealing with this too. Like, I lost someone that I love deeply.
I was trying to navigate that trauma the same way you were. And there's no manual for that.
And and she's just like, no, like, you're processing through this. And obviously we didn't process it well in our time, but you're going to get help. And that's, and through that, now we're going to have a better relationship because we can have these dialogues and stuff that we didn't have because we masked it with our happiness. We masked it with googly eyes on fruit to make each other laugh. Like, it's a beautiful moment.
You know, just thinking about what you were saying there, Greg, and it made me think about, you've also got Jamie dealing with his father not being there.
Right.
Towards the end of the season, when his father's in rehab and he doesn't know his father's in rehab.
Yeah.
And he's looking, you know, he's looking for his dad. And he's like, you know, Ted's like, what would you tell him? And I'd tell him to F off. And then I'd tell him, you know, thank you and all of that.
So that's an episode I really want to get into because it's basically the Mother's Day episode is what it felt like to me, because we get a ton of mom related stuff in that third season, which I'm going to quote Ted's line from season 1, where he says, boy, I love meeting people's moms. It's like reading an instruction manual as to why they're nuts. Like, that's what he says when he's going to meet Rebecca's mom. But then when we get all the moms, we get Jamie's mom, we get Ted's mom, and then we see the impact that these moms who stuck around, these moms who stuck it out, really tried to make something work that was clearly not broken, but clearly damaged in some way. What Jamie teaches Roy on that pitch, right? When Jamie says, F you and then thank you. It's the speech that Ted gives his mom later on, right? The one in the kitchen where he says, thank you for this and F you for this and thank you for this and F you for that. He's able to unburden himself, right? With the things that he's wanted to tell her, but couldn't figure out a way to do it in I don't even know if it was a constructive way, but in a way that wouldn't harm that relationship that he clearly values. So let's talk moms a bit here. John, we can start with Ted's mom or Rebecca's mom, who we get a lot more with Rebecca's mom, obviously. But like, what are your thoughts on some of the moms we're getting here?
Well, Jamie's mom made me cringe.
So you're saying you had the same face, the same look on your face that Roy had when they're cuddling on the couch, and Roy's just like,
the whole like jumping up on, wrapping her legs around them, and like, yeah. And it just made me think, like, you know, was she overcompensating for the way the father was,
right?
You know, and things like that. But it also really helped me understand where Jamie was coming from, because in the beginning, you know, Jamie's a prick. There's no doubt about it.
But he's this immature man-child baby. I think man-child is what Roy even calls it. But you can see why he had that stunted adolescent sort of attitude.
Yep. That's exactly it. So that one kind of struck me. I mean, she only wants him the best for him.
Oh yeah.
But she kind of overdoes it.
And he even says in the season 1 when they're burning things in to honor
to get rid of the
curse,
ghost,
right?
Whatever. And
he says like I should, maybe I don't recognize my mom enough. Maybe I think too much about trying to make my dad proud. I don't think enough about making my mom proud. And now we get to like see the other half of that, right?
Right. But then, I mean, Rebecca's mom. I know people like that, and the whole, when the boys in the pub say that, well, you're kind of like our grandmother. She's like, no, I'm not. She doesn't
want to be tagged with those extra years.
Yeah, it's like, no, I want to be, the Rebecca's sister, or whatever. There was a bit. I took a little bit of that away from it, and then Ted's mother. It was. I like the way they handled that whole situation, with her just showing up, him having to deal with that fact. It showed they showed a lot in a short period of time.
Right.
There was a lot to absorb there, and then her taking off without him. When he's sleeping, But the making of the dinner, she didn't know what. She kind of reminded me of my mom in some ways, in that making of the 2 dinners because I don't know what you want, and that kind of stuff. And then in the end, he's like, I apologize and let me serve you. And they start with the wine, and all of that. But difficult. I mean, none of them are in situations I would want to be in. Right. None of them are dealing with, whether Jamie's father was a drunk and now they're divorced and they're separated, and she's with this other guy that's kind of a milquetoast, and then, Rebecca's mom's cheating on her, and Ted's father committed suicide. And I'm not real sure how young Ted was. I'm thinking teens.
When his dad died?
Yeah.
He says it in the dart game, up until I was aged when he passed away.
Okay.
He throws it in. I was 10, 12, something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And you even get in that moment though with his mom, right? Like where he's like, why are you here? Right. Like, and she had a reason for coming still, like, and it was to reach out and be like, listen, you're dropping the ball as a dad.
Right. Henry misses you.
And I like, that was her as a parent being like,
I have to have a tough conversation with you,
because, and Ted knew it, like, because he's like, why are you here? And that's what he's like, F you for just showing up unannounced. Like, and thank you, but for all this, but like, she's still in the midst is parenting, right? Like, it's almost a flip side of, I don't know, John, if you've seen, but it's the other Apple TV show, Shrinking. I know, John, you and I both have watched it, where the setup is basically that a dad loses, guy loses his wife, who's a psychiatrist, and then he's trying to still raise his daughter, but he basically shuts down for a year, right? Like, that's the whole premise. Like, and it's not and that's not spoiling anything, because that's
the concept of the show.
General premise.
Yeah. But it almost is where it's like, where the frustration of that show is like, how could you as a parent shut down and not invest in your kid? Yeah. Where at least, whether she was doing it the right way or not, she was trying to do what she felt was right for her kid in the moment of losing her husband, totally. and moment of her losing her dad. Sure, it, long term, there was this stuff of, we didn't talk about, we just covered it up with happiness, and
which I think she's got this guilt complex going into this episode, where she can't bring up what she's here for, because she's like, I want to be a great grandmother, but I feel guilt about how I handled things as a parent, and I've got to like balance all this. and I know he's feeling frustrated with me and hurt with me, and there's things that need to come up here. So she's playing it as slow as she can, as carefully as she can, waiting for the opportunity to have that conversation. Yeah.
I just think I love that relationship and that dynamic because they, they had the conversation, and sometimes you need people to help guide you to have those conversations, which is,
and it's usually a mom or a dad, right? It's usually a parent,
mom or dad. But I'll even say it from the aspect of sometimes you need people in your life like psychologists, therapists, trusted mentors who are saying, listen, you need to be honest with your mom of what you're dealing with and stuff like this, so that you can have a better relationship. So often I feel like we as a society, we don't have conversations and communications because we don't want to hurt somebody, because we know it's going to be tough and sticky. And then in the midst of that, we make it worse by just dwelling on it, and they don't even know what we're going through and processing in our mind.
Yeah, you're having an entire argument in your head that they're getting blamed for,
and that they have no idea. And so sometimes it was a beautiful example of how you need people in your life to say, hey, listen, you need to have an honest conversation. And yes, it might feel uncomfortable and difficult in this moment, but holy cow, what it can do moving forward to strengthen your relationship. Because I guarantee you, Ted and his mom's relationship, I never told my mom to F off, right? Like,
my dad would have knocked me out.
Pull him 3 times in like the span of an hour. But that be able to say, like, that's what needed to happen in that moment so that they could grow.
The purge they went through there is going to clearly create foundational things that make
they're going to have a better, stronger relationship because of the honesty that happened.
Totally.
And it just was like, yes, this is where this is where parenting is messy. And we don't have a we don't have a manual. You can be like, oh, there's books out, but nobody. Like, how many of us sat before we had kids and said, I will never do this, and then we go, I will never let my kid play on their phone, at a restaurant, because I want them we're going to sit as a family and talk. And sometimes you go, oh, my kid's gone through it for a day. We're going out to eat. And you know what? I'm going to let them just watch YouTube videos on it because they're calm and relaxing.
Because John's Comics with Kids is a great channel for all ages. What's up, Steve? He's going to be on the finale when we get to the 5th Ted Lasso TED Talk. We're going to have my man Steve on from the team.
What is the finale about?
It's about mentorship, actually. It's about the relationship between the leaders and teams, and that connectivity between guiding someone to be their best.
Oh, we need to do Band of Brothers on that one.
Oh, man. I'm trying to decide what shows to be doing next. I'm a mega Band of Brothers fan. That's a phenomenal. Yeah, Steve.
We're both going through Arrested Development. We can talk about how you parent.
The inverse scenario, learning from the flaws of a previous, right?
Of every single character.
That's such a good show. So, I mean, I feel like we've hit on most of the big stuff I wanted to hit on here.
What about Nate?
I know that this was one of the things that John brought up when I sent him the breakdown. He's like, Nate and his dad, that's a whole balloon that you could get into. John, what were your takeaways from Nate and his journey with his dad?
Well, I mean, I think there were a lot of parallels there, because you've got Nate, right from the beginning, he's trying to get that certain, table
approval
at the restaurant. He wants that specific table at the restaurant.
Yeah.
And they're not going to give it to him. They're putting him, back near the kitchen.
Yep.
And he stands up and he goes up and he gets, and you see him start to gain confidence.
Yeah.
And that confidence builds through the show to where he ends up, where he's at in the show, and the conflict and all of those other things that grow from it. But you see there's the scene where he's talking to his mother. And I just got the impression that he didn't talk to his mother as much as he talked to his dad. Maybe that, it's that type of relationship, and she pulls out that like map that his father had made of, how they were gonna, and it helps him build his relationship with his girlfriend there. I can't remember her name, but
Jade.
Jade, yeah.
The anniversary.
Yeah. But I mean, it again, each of these, as the characters evolve, you start to learn, more and more about their relationships. And I just thought that there were some nice touches in there and stuff, but it definitely had an impact on who Nate started out, who he became, things like that.
Because you had the Nate clearly wanted male approval, was clearly fed, and when Ted started feeding him that, it was like surrogate dad moment. I got what I'd always wanted, and now I need more and more of it. And then when Ted was spreading that to the Roys and the Beards and the other
start to get that.
It was like yeah. I remember a teaching professional who came to our school was talking about social development with kids and the concept of a teacher being the sun, the bright shining sun. And you didn't want the sun to shine on some kids, but not on others. The sun should shine equally. And I think at some points that if you watched on the rewatches for me, I've noticed that there are definitely times when Ted is not a consistent bright light for everyone because of the baggage he's carrying around. There are times when it's not as even. Now, does Nate respond well to that challenge? No, he doesn't manage that well. And I think that's on Nate completely, but you can see what is driving Nate to do what he does and treat people the way that he does, the overreactions that he has. Inversely, you've got his mom who doesn't necessarily wax and wane. She's always shining brightly on him all the time, but he doesn't necessarily value her approval the way he seeks it from his dad.
It seems like Nate's big struggle with this relationship is he needs the male approval, and because of the aspect of communication isn't there, right? There's that one scene where his dad's like, I've always thought like he almost was like, I thought you were great, but he never vocalized that to Nate. And I think, Ted doesn't have the picture that Nate gave him on his desk. He has it at his house, right? Or something like that. And so Nate doesn't, because of Nate's past hurts of not having the vocalization of that he matters and that he's important. When he doesn't, it's a physical vocalization by not seeing the photo. Yeah. But to him, he's taking those past pains that he has because of what he's dealt with his dad, because there wasn't that communication, that now he's projecting it onto Ted of, you don't care, which is then, Ted's like, what are you talking about? Like, are you like, and it's so subtle to see those moments where it's like, man, it's just what we talked about at the beginning of the episode. It's across the board of all the different dynamics of parenting and the ups and the downs and the.
Yeah, because ultimately Nate is so impacted by a desire to get this approval from his dad that it's driving everything that he does all the way through. Oh, what's up, Carrie? Hi, much appreciated. Carrie, the official unofficial geek. My friend Carrie, I hope you're doing well. Thank you for coming by. And much appreciated, my man, Steve. Don't worry, you will get your opportunity soon. But I think it's easy to hate on Nate and be frustrated with his, pettiness in some ways. But I think John highlighted his growth, and I think his mom seems to be a big part of that. I don't know your thoughts, John.
I guess one of the things that I'm thinking about with both Nate and Sam is you also have different cultures. Mm-hmm. So you've got mores and stuff like that come into play that are just, brought into just culturally.
Because you can tell that Nate's dad is not somebody that grew up in a household where he got much praise. Right. So he withholds praise constantly for his daughter and the journey she's going on, for his son. There's a giant gap of like, I'm not supposed to praise you. You're supposed to do your work, and that's it. Like, that's not my gig, is to put the roof over your head, the clothes on your back. I'm not here to praise you. Right.
Yeah. Yep.
Now I do want to point out this though. Nate still sucks. Okay. I don't want to give him Like,
I'm not giving him a pass. If it felt like I was giving Nate a pass,
I just don't want Nate to get a pass because Nate still
No.
sucks and ended up being my least favorite. He went from one of my favorite characters to easily my least favorite character because they rushed his arc in the season 3. But I get it; they had to tell what they wanted to tell. But Nate still sucks. I just want that to be known.
But I did like I could appreciate on rewatch seeing the chinks in Nate's armor as he went along, and he started basically seeking more approval, and nothing Ted could do, even when Ted did it right, could feed the beast. Right? It was always creating anybody else getting sun meant Nate felt he was not getting
but
it.
It goes back to what John pointed out of what Sam's dad said, right? Of kill him with kindness, of moving forward. It was literally ticking off Nate that, like, why are you still doing this? Like, there's this back end, like, you're trying to get something out of this. Like, he couldn't take it at face value, and it was ticking him off because he wanted to hate Ted. He wanted to have a villain. He wanted to have someone that he could say, you're just like everyone else in this situation. And so when he didn't have that, it pissed him off even more.
Or maybe I could say things to Ted that I can't say to my dad. I can get mad at Ted the way I can't get mad at my dad to his face, right? Another great dad in the chat, a dad of 2. We got 90 Chad, 90 miles from comics. What is parenting is 90, he says. Chad. His kids are youngest of all, so he's fourth in the dominoes in this group.
Ooh, no, thank you.
I got young kids, so man,
he's got really young. So Chad, if you guys don't know Chad, he used to be a big part of this community, but of course he had his first kid, took over as it made big, great dad choices, took over being a great dad, and I want to say, Chad, you correct me if I'm wrong. I think you got a new one that's like 1 now. I think he's got a new little Chad running around.
See, right when my kids were born, I decided to create a YouTube channel and get away from it.
I mean, and I just decided to create one to just so that they would hang out with me, and it hasn't worked well because clearly I'm hanging out with 2 bearded guys on a Friday night. So here we are. But yeah, I do appreciate, John, you brought in Nate in a big way because I do think he and his dad, to Greg's point, balance out what we're seeing with somebody like Sam, who's about the same age and dealing with some of the same successes, struggles, internal thoughts and dramas. But you can see how maybe one parenting style was successful and one didn't quite succeed the way that maybe the parents wanted. She's going to be 1 on Monday. Holy cow.
Your memory's good.
Wow. Amazing. And yeah, Perry's a dad of 2. What's going on, Perry?
So wait,
18?
we've got a bunch of September birthday kids in this chat.
Yeah, because Charlie's birthday is the 16th. She's 8 days away. Next Saturday will be Charlie's
my birthday was last weekend.
We don't care about you, Greg. We don't care.
My daughter's in 2 weeks. So all September, all the good people are born in September. That's all I'm saying.
All right. I don't necessarily have another big dad, parent, father, son, mom, kid discussion to have beyond this. I feel like we kind of hit the big ones. Greg, were there any other moments or characters or things you wanted to discuss concerning parenting for this series?
No, I think we touched on. I was glad that we hit Jamie Hart's dad. Going to rehab,
and Jamie hit his dad too.
Boom. And to have that moment at the end of him talking with him, and that it was just such a good thing. But yeah, who would have thought by season 3 that I'd like Jamie Tart more than I like Nate?
And I do think those are the characters that stick the longest, are the ones whose journey, for me, another great Jaime Lannister, I thought was one of my favorite Game of Thrones characters, just watching how I went from hating him to loving him to hating him again, the journey of Jaime Lannister on Game of Thrones. Similar in this Jaime, in the sense that I was watching somebody that I was growing to appreciate what they were going through, right? Yep. For sure. John, any last parenting thoughts, advice, quotes, any moments that you wanted to discuss?
I think, it's funny because I hang out with a group of guys that I call my Illuminati. One of them is is the head of English Lit at Brown, and one of them's a writer. And we were around one day, and they were talking about Philip Larkin, and May quotes him.
I was just about to say, John, you didn't even mention that.
Yeah, and it's like, to me, she sums it up. He says it. They fuck you up, your mom and dad. And it's like she goes into that poem.
No, go. You want to read? You want to read any? Sorry, I didn't want to stop you from reading.
It's they fuck you up, your mom and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with faults they had and add some extra just for you. But they were fucked up in their turn by folds in old style hats and coats. By fools in old style hats and coats who half the time were soppy, stern, and half at one another's throats. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can and don't have any kids yourself.
And for those that don't remember, May, the bartender, she quotes a chunk of this in one of the episodes in the third season,
next to the last episode.
Yeah.
Well, it's the mom episode, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because
maybe it is a mom's episode. Yeah.
Because it's when she's quoting it while Ted's at the bar and Beard's chit chatting with Ted's mom.
Yeah, right. Because I love how Beard and his mom get along so well.
But I resonate with that of like how many of like my friends, like where it's like I've had those relationships with their mom, like that we are like they're like my surrogate mother, right? Like that I can, but it's a different relationship. Like you're joking, you're goofing off with them, and and that is, it's like you're almost like it's like this friendship, like in a weird way, but it's this like parent friendship because like you're both like your kid's crazy, like you know it because you raised your kid. I know it because I'm friends with your kid, and can you believe the shenanigans they do? Like so, like I really love that they showcase that dynamic because I feel like there's a lot of us that are like, oh man, like like our buddies who are like have a fun and good relationship with their mom because of those friendships that have developed. And
absolutely
the best advice in the show: be a goldfish.
Right.
All right. I mean, because you think about all the things that happened with these relationships, it's because, like you said earlier, John, you're dwelling on things that may not even have happened. It's just
we keep playing the same. We make tapes in our heads and we then play those tapes over and over.
And you can see how much Ted has been carrying things, and Roy's been carrying things, and Jamie and Nate and all these characters have a baggage, right? Connected to a parent, connected to a child, connected to some experience that hasn't worked its way through yet. And to the mental health comment that Greg was making earlier, obviously having a person that gives you the guidance that you need in the time that you need it to navigate something that you've been just carrying instead of navigating, that makes a huge difference. And that moment, honestly, with Jamie, obviously it was predicated upon a great relationship with Dr. Sharon. But that moment when Jamie is able to say some things about his father on the pitch, that then Ted goes back to his mom and is able to then verbalize because of that. Ted was put into the right place, the right time to take that information in and utilize it. Right. And it has the lasting impact you want. Huge thank you to these guys. If you're not following them on Instagram, if you're not checking in on Bearded Comic Bros YouTube channel, I'm not wearing this shirt for me. I mean, it looks great and it feels comfortable, but like you get your own. You got to get your own
shirts at beardedcomicbro.com.
I'm saying, the funny thing is I can wear this with a hat and sunglasses. People are like, oh, you got your own shirt. That's kind of fun.
And you're like, yes, I do.
And I'm like, I'm not that handsome and my beard's a lot grayer, but I got it.
I'm catching up to you. I'm catching up.
You guys got a long ways to go.
All the layers going on here. But I've got the link down below, so please make sure you're following these awesome gentlemen. Gentlemen, thanks for reaching out to be a part of this discussion. I feel like this was a great way to highlight all the ups and downs of parenting with dads and within the confines of this show. So I appreciate you guys making that time.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So again, this was part 3 of potentially 5 breakdowns of themes from Ted Lasso. We got a lot more to come. It should be a couple of weeks from now, and I'm going to have JP Budget Collecting and No Good Comics on the show, and we're going to be talking about something I don't even remember right now off the top of my head what it was, what that theme was. Now I'm gonna have to. I gotta open my phone now. They're doing mentorships. That's what we're doing. Those guys. The finale is life changes. So we'll do mentorships with JP and Justin in a couple of weeks, not next week, but the week after. And the finale is going to be about big life changes, whether that means taking a job halfway around the world, getting a divorce, losing a loved one, some of the big life changes and navigating those things, because obviously that's a huge part of this program. Thanks, everybody, for hanging out. There will not be a Saturday show in the morning. I apologize. We're going to be at the soccer pitch by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, doing soccer dad shenanigans, reading comics, the usual. So I feel like Greg's like ready to say something. He's like,
No, I was at the soccer pitch tonight before this. So it's funny that I was at the soccer pitch with my 2 girls before we did a soccer show live stream, and now you're going to be on the pitch tomorrow. So
it's actually the way it is, right? It's got to be. But I will miss all of y'all tomorrow morning, in quotes. But I will be back next week. I am on JP's channel talking more Black Hammer. So that's Tuesday night next week. I'm also on his channel on Sunday night playing Dungeons and Dragons. So if you want to catch me, I guess you got to subscribe to JP's Budget Collecting next. So thanks everybody for coming out, and we will catch you all again hopefully soon.
Nate
Take
still
care,
sucks.
everybody.